We hope that over the course of this program, you learn about the candidates and what they hope to do if elected for the House. While we never endorse a candidate, we do. The League does try to help shape important issues in the community. And if you're interested in joining the League, we would love to have you. And so all you need to do is go to www.lwvmn.org. Little advertisement for the League. I'm just a volunteer, by the way. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates and not those of the League of Women Voters. And sponsorship of the forum is not an endorsement by the League for any candidate. And so the candidates who filed for office and will be on the ballot were invited to join us tonight, and both have graciously said yes, so welcome. I would like to remind the candidates that this forum is being broadcast live and in its entirety, and so again, please check the cable for reviewing times. So this year, the citizens of Minnesota House District 43 are electing a representative to the House in Minnesota, and I don't like that, so I'm not going to read that. So I wrote this script, so imagine that. I don't like what I wrote, so, you know. Okay, so again, we would ask that you hold all applause until the end of the forum this evening. And the candidates, we ask that you focus on the issues. Records, the candidate's record is okay, but no personal attacks. So allow me to introduce you to our candidates tonight for House District 43B. There are two candidates for one position. Yes. Yes, so maybe you need to turn the volume up. So we have two candidates here for House District 43B. We have Rachel Buckles directly to my right and Lillie, so welcome. So the order of the forum will be this. All candidates will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. And then we have a nice timekeeper sitting in the first row. Hi, timekeeper. And so there are, when you have 30-second left of your speaking time, the timekeeper will hold up a yellow card that says 30 seconds, if you would like to show us that fabulous card. Then you will have 30 seconds. You still have 30 seconds, so you don't need to panic. And then when you see the red stop card, you do need to conclude, which means finish the sentence, obviously, that you're talking, but please don't start another one. And I will force this rule, and for some reason, they gave me a gavel, so I can really enforce it.
A lot of power with that.
I know. Oh, my gosh. So then I will ask questions. We have a number from the audience, and you have 2 minutes per response. And I'm just going to rotate back and forth, because what else am I going to do? So, but we could start with the same person every time, but that would not be so fair. So with that, we are ready to begin our opening statements, and so we'll start with Rachel Buckles.
All right. Do we stay sitting?
Yes, I suppose you could stand, but I would sit.
So first and foremost, my name is Rachel Buckles, and I just want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum. I know that this takes a lot of work, and so I really want to thank all the volunteers here that are dedicating their time to having this forum for us. I also really want to just quick give a shout out to my husband, Matt, back there, my 3 children, Ava, Caleb, and Aiden, and then my grandmother and my dad have also came along to watch me have my very first ever public forum. I'd also really like to thank Leon for being here. You know, this is my first time speaking in public. You've been doing this for 14 years, and so, you know, when I'm going to start mountain climbing, why not, you know, take Mount Everest, right? So, but that is exactly why I'm here, because I am one of those women that when you tell me that I can't do something, when you tell me that there is limits, my first thought is always, watch me. I was told that I wouldn't last the very first day of basic training for the Minnesota Army National Guard, and I served my 8 years, both in the National Guard as well as in the Army Reserves. I was told that I couldn't juggle being a teen mom, working multiple jobs, and successfully go to college. Well, I completed my 4-year degree, and in fact, I started working in the House of Representatives in a career field that I wanted within 6 months of graduating. I was also told that because I was having a child so young that I would be a drain on society, and I would like to say that we are in fact paying our fair share of taxes on the home that my husband and I just bought this last year. And so that 2 minutes went by a lot quicker than I thought I would, so I will wrap up with that.
Thank you very much. And so the next opening statement is Lillie.
Thank you. And You'll do a great job. Thank you. My name is Lillie, and I'm excited to be here in the fine Maplewood City Hall. We've got the mayor even here today and came out. And all of you, thank you very much for coming out on this rainy evening. And especially want to thank the League of Women Voters for organizing this opportunity. And you would think after being in office for a while, you might not like these things, but I'm actually an odd duck. I like the challenge of ideas. So I'm hoping that we do have some differences, and we can maybe hear those out tonight, and our constituents can make a choice of what's better, or what's the best opportunity or best path forward for Maplewood and North St. Paul and Oakdale, and to serve in the Minnesota legislature. So it's my second time meeting her, and I'm excited, but many friendly faces out in the crowd, including some of my family and others, and I'm not going to go through who all they are, but you know, it's an honor to be in the legislature, and I mean that sincerely every day. I wasn't the high school king or any of those sort of things, or the smartest kid in my class. I wasn't that, you know, I didn't wear the big gold lapel at graduation, but you know, I'm a bit of a fighter myself, and you know, I'm kind of proud of what I've been able to do for this community, with working with other leaders in this community, and we've partnered together, and I think we've been able to do some good work for this area, and I'm hoping to continue to do that, and that's why I'm fired up. I recently had an accident, so I have some new issues actually that are important to me. I was recently injured, and so I really have a great empathy for those that are in wheelchairs and other mobilely challenged things. To be honest, I didn't have some of that empathy that I, you know, to the extent I do now. Anyways, I'm excited about the future, and I'm proud to serve this area, and it's a great area, so thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. So we're ready to start our questions, and so we won't give Lillie a break, and we're going to start with the first question with you. And so what do you think is the most urgent problem facing the state of Minnesota? Well, you know, we left some stuff on the table last session, and clearly there was some work that we need to do on the opioid epidemic. Everybody reads the news, and like I said just a few seconds ago, I was recently injured, and I happened to be on some of those opiates, so you can, firsthand, I kind of knew some of the power of those drugs, and you know, I'm proud to say I'm off of them, but they were good, and I can see where people could get in trouble. And so anyways, beyond my personal experience, we have a problem around the state, and we need to deal with it. So that's one. Elder abuse in the nursing home continues to be a problem. Right outside this door, they do licensing. We have a license bureau for the folks of this area that come in. We need to keep working on the Min-Lars problems. So there's a whole breadth of issues that we need to work on. And of course, the traditional things that we can work on as a state are there as well, and will be challenging. Clearly, we struggle as a state with our demographics, especially in education. Our minority kids continue to just lag behind. Minnesota's doing a great job, and we really, you know, we have a school board member here, and they're fighting every day, and we have some, I think, 5 award-winning schools right here in this district, and the governor came out today to Carver, to a local school. How cool is that? But it's because they're doing good work, and also to say thank you, but it's, so the education, and to realize we have this education gap, and we need to make sure that everybody's succeeding. You know why that's important? Because Minnesota, for example, Minnesota has all these businesses, and we need all these workers up and thriving. We need our neighbors to thrive. We want everybody to succeed, and so that's what I'm excited about, and I think there's some great opportunities that are on the table yet. Thank you very much. So same question for Rachel Buckles. What is the most urgent problem facing the state of Minnesota?
Sure. So I do agree with Leon that the opioid crisis is absolutely urgent and needs to be addressed, and it was very disappointing that that was vetoed. That would be an example of very good bipartisan work that was completely, you know, eliminated with the stroke of a pen. I'd also say that tax conformity, you know, there's so many small businesses that have to keep, you know, double the books to make sure that they're doing their taxes according to Minnesota state law and according to the federal tax code, and that is extremely cumbersome and expensive for a lot of our small businesses. I'd also say, too, that our roads and bridges really need to be up to standard. And I know that here in the metro, a lot of us suffer with rush hour. I know I do every day. I know my dad back there, driving to Minneapolis, he deals with rush hour. And as much as we want to widen our roads, there's also roads out in rural Minnesota that are major highways for a lot of our trucking industries, and they're completely demolished. They've been patched over so often that it might as well just be a gravel road. Education is also another huge thing. I know your children are grown, but I have children right now in our education systems. Earlier I said when we were testing the microphones, my oldest son just started middle school at John Glenn, and my 2 other children started their first day back at Castle. And so I know firsthand that we need to make sure that resources for our struggling learners are there. We need to support our teachers. We need to let our teachers be able to teach the way that their individual classrooms need them to teach. We can't, I really want to try to look at why do we need all this rigorous testing. I know we need to have standards, but last night my 9-year-old told me that he wasn't looking forward to 3rd grade, and I asked him why. And he said, MCAs. And it's just one of those things, like, what 9-year-old needs to be concerned about MCAs the night before school starts? And I think that speaks volumes, much more than any politician could ever tell you.
Thank you very much. So the next question will start with you, Rachel Buckles. And there's a couple questions, and so that are basically the same theme, so I'm going to just pick one of the phrasings. So Minnesota currently has a strong state economy. So what are your priorities when the state has a budget surplus in terms of what you're going to do with that?
Sure. So for budget surpluses, I always like to kind of listen to what is a consensus among constituents. And so I'm not a legislator, but I actually do work at the House already for 2 legislators. And so I do work on constituent cases for people over in Sherburne County, as well as down in Nobles and Rock counties. And a lot of people, they want to see some of their taxes be cut, because clearly if we're having surpluses, that means that we're taxing too much. We also want to look at saving money for a rainy day. Just because you have that extra money doesn't necessarily mean you have to spend it. I mean, especially with the economy, when we come into recessions, and that's just part of, our economy, we have rises and falls. Sometimes it's good to have that rainy day fund set aside, so we don't need to be asking our taxpayers to pay in more to the state when they are already struggling with their own personal pocketbooks. Also, if constituents are really wanting us to beef up security and safety within our schools, that is definitely another thing that we can look at with the surplus. But the overwhelming response that I would give with surpluses is listen to what the constituents want.
Thank you. And now, same question. The state has a strong economy. What are your priorities when the state does have a budget surplus?
Yeah. It's a great question, and it's one as a legislator that we all have to deal with. And it reminds me, I just recently saw the play Joseph at St. Mark's Lutheran Church, and the big theme towards the end is, figuring out answering the dream, the part where they answer the dream, and then you see, the prophecy of what the dream means. Well, the story is there's like 7 good years and then 7 bad years. Well, we just happen to be in the good years right now. Well, I've served in the bad years, and former Representative, now Mayor Slavic served in the bad years, and it's tough, and it's tough for even conservatives. I'll tell you, there's stuff that conservatives like that, like that you would think traditionally, and it's tough on everybody. So now we're in a time where there's about 6 years of where we had deficits. Now we're about 5 years into surplus. And the forecast just came out again. There's $350 or $325 million of surplus, and that's on top of the $1.6 million or billion-dollar surplus. So it's required by law that some of that money is put away into a reserve, and we're going to do that as a state. I think everybody kind of agrees on that and gets that. But then what do you do? So then that's where it gets tricky, and so there's always differences of what the priorities are. And I would go back to investing in the kids, and I think that's just Minnesota's been great with all these companies, like I mentioned earlier, and I just think it's a sure bet. To think that you're not going to pay as citizens eventually if you don't take care of kids and educate them and do a good job. I hate to say it, it sounds harsh, but you're going to pay in corrections or you're going to pay in other ways, and we as a society owe that to our neighbors and and that's what makes Minnesota great. So I'm sorry.
Great again.
Thanks. So we're going, back at, I think so. Yeah. So we'll go back to Leon, Lillie, and I actually have a pile of questions all on the same topic, and which happens sometimes, and I'm just going to pick this phrase because it's the shortest. So what way can our state government help with the high costs of health care for Minnesotans?
Yep. So Minnesota has continued to offer some of the best health care in the country, and that has been the case for years. One of our biggest state, I think it is the biggest state employer. I think a lot of people want to say it's the government. It's actually the Mayo Clinic is actually the biggest employer in the state of Minnesota. And, I work in my other life, I work at Delta Airlines. I know people are coming in from all over the world to come to Minnesota and get health care, and Minnesota does a great job. But we have some areas that we really need to do better. There's people, like the working poor, that are still struggling, and we need to make sure that they're getting the health care that they need. Because what happens is, again, we all pay. People will show up at Regions or right next door here at St. John's, and they'll offer care, and that'll go, don't be fooled, that'll go on your taxes, and you're going to pay. So we need to, I happen to be for universal health care. I just think it's a moral right that everybody should have health care. I think it's actually very pro-business. It's it's something that would just level the playing field for everyone if they had the quality health care. I was lucky enough to go to school in England for a year, and people were, I don't know, they always say people are starving and they're not, they're not getting health, not starving, but they're not getting health care in England, and they're on the streets and that sort of thing. But that's not the case. They have good care. But yes, if you're super wealthy, you're going to hop in a plane and fly to Mayo. That's not an insult to the system there. But I happen to think that it's a moral duty to take care of our neighbors that way.
Thank you. And so, Rachel Buckles, same question. What way can our state government help with the high costs of health care?
Sure. So it sounds like you and I have been fairly on the same page so far. And so when it comes to where you said on universal health care that it's a moral right, I don't disagree that we shouldn't have access to affordable health care. I personally just don't trust that the government is the best option that's going to deliver that, because look at Minute, look at Minlars, and now I just don't trust that the government will be able to deliver on something as important as that, and I look at, what happened with you, with your accident. It worries me that that could have been placed in the hands of the government, and knowing what's happened to a lot of people on Minshire, that would worry me that you would get kicked around like that, and especially when you're already down and out. I don't trust the government to be the best solution to bring forth that health care. But I do agree that affordable access to health care is absolutely essential. What I would like to see happen to bring down health care costs is pharmacy benefit managers, first of all. One of the legislators that I work for, he has MS. He is in a wheelchair, and he deals with pharmacy benefit managers that were really getting in the way between him and his medication that he needs in order to function as a legislator, and not even just as a legislator, as a person. And it really, really upset me to know that you can go to your doctor, and you and your doctor can come up with a plan to help you when you're sick, and you might have medications that you take, and then a pharmacy benefit manager, somebody that you don't know, will never see their face, will never know more than, their first name, decides if you actually can take that medicine or not, and that medicine can be life-changing for you. I also think that I'm not saying that we should get rid of them, but we should definitely take a look again at what mandates we're having insurance company provide for people, and see, is there anything that is a little redundant? Is there anything that could be done differently? And who knows, maybe it actually should be put in place the way it is right there. So those are just a couple of my thoughts on healthcare.
Thank you very much. So with our next question, we're back to you, Rachel Buckles. And I have several questions on the same theme, and I think we all read the paper and know what's probably coming. So, we have, I would guess, a rising difficulty in building a consensus between our legislators on every level. So what steps would you take to increase consensus building if elected?
So again, I have the pleasure of working with two members that I think work pretty well bipartisanly. I know that there are many Democrat legislators that have reached over to a couple of my legislators to work closely with them. And I actually have a very good rapport with Representative Rob Eklund. I'm always teasing him about bringing me back donuts from World's Best Donuts. And we see on the news so often a lot of our members grandstanding. I know if anybody was watching the Judicial Senate hearing for the Supreme Court nomination for Judge Kavanaugh, there was a lot of tension and there's a lot of grandstanding, and we see it on the House floor. I believe your seatmate does a lot of that on the House floor. But behind closed doors, there actually is pretty good consensus, and I would say that there is a lot of friendship. And so I would definitely stay away from a lot of the grandstanding. And I know that there's a lot more common goals between legislators than there's not. And I think that when you start to take those common goals and you build off of that, when you start to have disagreements and differences, you still have that mutual respect for each other. So when you start with a common cause and work towards a solution, sometimes your solutions might be a little bit different, but ultimately you're still trying to solve the same problem. And I think when we start looking at that, instead of looking at, Democrat versus Republican, that's when you're going to start to see a lot more consensus building, and that's when you're going to start to see much better legislation come out of St. Paul.
Thank you. Leon Lillie, same question. What steps will you take to increase consensus building between legislators if elected?
Well, I don't know. You work there, and former Representative Slavic can probably say if it's true or not, but I think I do a pretty good job of that. I try to work well with both sides of the aisle, and I always kind of joke about it, but I try not to get up on the floor, and I call it punch somebody in the nose. It's you can fight with somebody. I don't think you meant my seatmate. I don't think Representative Fisher's the one you're talking about.
Yeah,
I think you meant
meant
maybe a representative from Rochester.
Yes. Yes.
So we'll go with that. But I think Peter does a nice job with that as well, and
he's
a
nice.
true gentleman.
Yes.
But one thing that was kind of neat with this recent accident is that, all the members really were truly generous, both sides of the aisle. It was really a healthy moment, and my wife and I were over in Regions, and I was getting ready for her to go to the Capitol, and the nurse is like, "Where are you going?" I go, "I'm going to work." And they go, "No, you're not." So then so I said, "No, I'm going to work." So anyways, Representative Fabian happened to be there, who's a representative. Honestly, you could drive to Chicago. It takes him that long to get up. He lives up in Thief River Falls, and he wheeled me into, because I had promised a Republican chair, that I was coming to the meeting, the Capital Investment. He called me on the phone and said, "Leon, I want you to come," and I'm like, "Okay." So I came, but no, I really try to work well. The speaker and I get along quite well. And again, I think and yes, we have differences, and like you had different opinions on the health care, and these are passionate, felt ideas, but ultimately I think we can work together and, Keep an eye on the prize, which is a better Minnesota. So.
Thank
And
you.
if I could say too.
We're by our rules, we aren't doing rebuttals, so.
Oh, no, it was the comment to say.
So we can wait till the end and you can include it in your closing
All right.
statement. So the next question is for Leon Lillie, and I have several questions again on the same general theme. We know Minnesota's infrastructure takes a beating every winter after winter after winter, and so I could phrase this a lot of different ways, but I guess I'll just phrase it in the simplest way. One of the people in the audience phrased it: what are your priorities for maintaining and improving the state infrastructure?
It's a very important question. It's one that's, it doesn't get all the glamour. And yes, in the spring, we all notice it as we, you hit those potholes and they jar you, or you pay for the repair in your car or whatnot. But it's very real in Minnesota. And Rachel mentioned in greater Minnesota with the farming and moving the agriculture and product around the state. I mean, it's real statewide, not just here in the metro, but it's a big problem in the metro. And intersections are hugely, and roads are hugely expensive. So I'm just going to be quite honest with you. I was there when we voted for the last tax increase, and it's on the fuel. And that was, I think, in 2005, and we overrode a veto of the governor, my hockey buddy, T-Paw, Tim Pawlenty, and but, with some help of the Republicans, but, it's really hard. What's happening is, and it's just really hard to have an honest discussion, because it takes money. It's not just to invest in this. It's hugely expensive per mile, and so we've been really fighting. There's some great things that are going on in the East Metro in the next couple of years, right down the road from where she lives, and then kind of between our houses on Hadley. Senator Uyghur and I were able to get $10 million along with the state help with the feds to get Hadley intersection done. If you look on 36, I'm kind of proud we've been able to fix a lot of the, English, 61, on 35. So we've been fighting, trying to do a good, a strong fight for the East Metro, but it's going to take money, and that's the bottom line. It's tougher now that gas is climbing, quite honestly, and I totally was in favor of a blink on and off kind of scenario. There is kind of a flinch for everybody. It gets to the $3 mark, and you're like, it's $2.97. Do you want to pay $3.02 because of the gas tax? Of course, no one's going to want to. But it was $2. If it was 5 cents, people wouldn't have minded, but it's a problem, and it's going to take money. I hate to say it.
Thank you. So Rachel Buckles, same question. What are your priorities for infrastructure maintenance in the state?
Sure. So a really great example of bipartisan work. Representative Karen Clark actually presented a bill to the Agriculture Finance Committee, and she really got in the weeds on exactly how, but you take soybeans, and some of the byproduct from soybeans you can actually use to create a sealant over asphalt to try to help prolong the longevity of asphalt roads, so that way they're not breaking down quite as much. And so it was a pilot. She wanted appropriations from AURI, from a research grant, and to test this on some streets in Minneapolis to see if this is a viable option. And I thought that was a great idea, because it helps make our roads and bridges last longer. They're using asphalt. You're raising a commodity for an agriculture product here in the state that we are very well known for, and we export, billions of dollars worth. And I just kind of thought this is a way that really would bring greater Minnesota and Metro Minnesota together for a common cause. And it's something that Republicans and Democrats can do, because we both have a common goal of making sure that our infrastructure is safe and sound. The problem is that, you say it takes money, and I say, well, yes, everything takes money, but how do we best invest that money to make sure that we get the best bang for our buck back? And so I was really appreciative to see that there were some initiatives for, other things more than just build more roads and fix it and think that that's okay, that there's new technologies that we can use in order to make our money last a little bit longer on our roads.
Thank you. So the next question will go back to you, Rachel Buckles. And I picked this question because I don't know what this is. I had to look it up on my phone.
Oh, boy.
So I'm going to read the definition because I figure everybody should know what it is. I just learned something, lifelong learner. So apparently there's concerns about the legislature passing, it says, preemption laws, and apparently preemption is the purchase of goods or shares by one person or party before the opportunity is offered to others. So I just learned something. So what is your position on preemption laws? Rachel Buckles.
All right. What was the definition for that?
That's why I looked it up.
My understanding, and please correct me if this is not quite right, but my interpretation of that is, so if you have a product and you offer it to somebody else before you offer it on the free market? Would that be a
I don't know.
fair?
I'll read the definition because this is new to me. The purchase of goods or shares by one person or party before the opportunity is offered to others.
Oh, so would it be more so for research? That, I would have kind of a,
Do you want me to answer that first?
yes,
Because that might
please
help
do.
you.
Okay.
That would be great, thank you.
So what, thank you, and then you'll have a good answer.
Yeah.
Preemption is what happened in some of the cities around the state now. They've started some smoking bans, or they've started maybe a livable wage. So her party the Republicans have decided that they want to stop preemption. They want to decide for all jurisdictions around the state what is best for them. So me as a policymaker, and I started on a city council, and I kind of go back to that. I think actually being on some of these local things is actually harder than what we do. It's certainly the school board and the city council. It's the smoke blowing, and former mayor Cardinal, you would appreciate this as well. I think it's harder than what we do sometimes, and they are closer to the local jurisdiction, and I think they have maybe a better sense than even we do sometimes. So I would support the local policymakers making decisions that and even if I don't necessarily agree with them, I think they have to face their voters, and they know what they need. One of the things that I've always hated, and it drives me absolutely crazy, is that like school boards have to go to that they have to vote to approve a levy, and they know what they need. They know what our local kids need, and I would trust our local schools, Nancy Livingston here in this case, and the others to make good decisions. That would be my preference. So I think I helped you a little.
Yes, you did.
It wasn't research. So anyways, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. So, Rachel, we're back to you.
Okay, appreciate that. Sometimes when you're hiding out in the agriculture committee, some of these other things are. So I would say that for the most part, I would absolutely believe in local control. I think that the closer to the problem, usually the solution is closer to the problem. So if you have issues that are happening, here in Maplewood, we would ask Mayor Slawick to go ahead and try to find ways to address it, and we would bring in community leaders to address the problem rather than, trek all the way to St. Paul. Well, I guess trekking to St. Paul is not too far for us here, but you don't really need the state to go ahead and fix some of those problems. Sometimes, though, I would also say that there could be unintended consequences that happen with preemption. So when you're talking about, you say livable wage, I think that also kind of goes hand in hand with the $15 an hour minimum wage. Here in the Twin Cities where the cost of living is exorbitant, $15 an hour is something that you probably do need to make in order to get by. Where you're living, from where my husband is from, if you make $15 an hour, that's actually a pretty decent wage because cost of living is much lower, housing is much lower, food prices can be a little bit lower too. And so when we talk about maybe a person working at City Hall as a clerk or a secretary or something, and they make, that $15 an hour minimum, if that's works great for them, but now somebody that's from Round Lake, maybe they might be drawn to move to the Twin Cities where you're going to make more money than staying in some of these towns that are completely dying off. So I absolutely support the idea, but sometimes I'm concerned that it could have unintended consequences. And so I'd really like to, I don't want to get into the weeds, but sometimes I think you might have to get into the weeds to make sure that you're not having unintended consequences for the rest of the state.
Thank you very much. So with this question, we will start with Leon Lillie, and I've kind of rephrased it, so hopefully this reads well since I just did it on the fly. So what can the Minnesota State Legislature do to improve the retention of current businesses in Minnesota and attract other businesses to our state?
Yep. So as it stands now, Minnesota is one of the top nations in the country for having the top 500 companies. So we have about 17, 18 companies right now, a 3M right down the road here. and we're lucky to have them. I think my son's a chemist, so maybe I'm a little biased. Per million people, so it's kind of a funky little formula. And I think, just to give you an idea, our neighbor to the east is like 20th, 21st in the country, with the top 500 companies. So we're lucky to have them too. So it's always a balancing act with trying to maintain these. In my other life, I mentioned earlier, I worked for Delta Airlines. Well, it used to be Northwest. Well, we were bought by a company that's from Atlanta. So the likelihood that they're going to move the corporate headquarters from Atlanta to Minnesota, which we heard in the press, was pretty unlikely. Just in all honesty. We love Minnesota, and despite the snow and all these things and the potholes, but no, it's a wonderful state, but it's unlikely that an Atlanta company is going to move to Minnesota. So the most likely scenarios for these big companies and other companies to build them from within, and we do a great job of that. And I feel kind of proud of the things that I did as a legislator this year. Was with the Capital Investment Committee that I serve on. We made investments at the University of Minnesota, and continued. A lot of it's, granted, boring stuff. It's just fixing the roofs, but some of it's like Century College, $6 million right here, and they're doing great things with the Fab Lab, and it's building ideas. And I think that's our future, is coming up with ways to build from within. And it may not be the Amazon that picks Minnesota, but quite honestly, take a look at it. They don't necessarily treat all their employees that well. So, by building within these tech jobs, solar and others, they make on average $70,000 a year. So, thank you.
Thank you. So Rachel Buckles, same question. How can the legislature improve the retention of current businesses and attract other businesses to the state?
So, well, I know my dad back there really appreciates the bonding for the U to fix the roofs and things like that as he works there. I would say that we have amazing schools. We have beautiful countryside. I cannot ever get enough of the North Shore. Going up to Two Harbors is like my happy place. The thing, though, that really holds us back, in my opinion, is our taxes. So I have a really good friend who is from California, and she's a geologist, and she works for oil companies. And her husband moved to Idaho, where, oh my goodness, the amount of money that she was paying as opposed to living in Idaho, lots. She was actually talking about possibly moving to the Twin Cities. And she said that it would be great to live here in Minnesota because, they visited and they love the state, but she doesn't exactly miss the amount of money that they pay in taxes. She says it's kind of nice to be able to put away money and go on vacations and things like that. Another thing, another example I have about taxes is my husband's dad worked for a company, does still work for a company called Worthington Ag Parts. By the name, you can tell that they used to be headquartered in Worthington, Minnesota. Well, they also had their corporate offices over in Maple Grove. Well, a couple years ago, they went over to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. They built a completely new facility. Obviously, moving out there costs money. Within just a couple short years, all the money that it costs for them to move, they've saved on taxes that they are no longer paying here in Minnesota. So I think we really, really need to take a look at, I understand that things cost money, and I understand that, we do have things that we have to pay for as a government, but sometimes you have to wonder, where is the line drawn?
Thank you very much. So this next question, we start with Rachel Buckles. So we know that the state passes a bonding bill, and so do you? The question is I guess, is there a size limit? Is the sky the limit? How would you decide the size of the bonding bill?
So I know the bonding bill this last year, I believe the House proposed 825, and then the Senate wanted 1.5 billion. And so we kind of came to a consensus there on our bonding bill. There's absolutely things that we need to address with our infrastructure. We need to make sure that we have clean water. We need to make sure that our wastewater facilities are taken care of. So there's absolutely things that need to be taken care of and addressed and paid for. I would say, however, that we need to stop looking at our budget, and this includes the bonding bill. We need to stop looking at this as an unlimited credit card, and we need to start paying attention to our state spending the same way that all of us in this room pay attention to our budget. And in my opinion, some of us pay more attention to our budget than others because they have kids that play hockey. But I think we need to pay more attention to how we're spending our money and not exactly take taxpayers for granted. So I wouldn't say that I have a limit when it comes to our bonding bill spending, but I definitely appreciated the $825 million versus the higher price tag that the Senate proposed.
Thank you. So Leon Lillie, same question. How do you decide the size of the bonding bill?
So many of you probably don't know the bonding bill is a little different than other legislation. It needs a supermajority. So it's a bit of a mess to put together. It takes, it's not just having the majority, and you need people from both sides of the aisle. You need buy-in from people and common interest to pass a bill that's in the betterment of Minnesota. So Minnesota, again, a lot of people don't know, probably are. Not to pat our own backs, but and Senator Uyghur is here, and in these last couple of years, we've achieved a AAA bonding rating. And what does that mean? You can borrow money that's really cheap. So it's like if you've got a high credit, former Mayor Cardinal, you sell real estate. So if people show up and they want to buy a house, if they got a really good credit rating, they can probably buy it a lot easier and get a better rate. That's the same with the state. And we don't usually talk about that. So by the budget analysis, we can afford to carry a debt of $3 billion. And there's always been kind of this $1 billion threshold. Now, keep in mind, we went over it these last 2 years. We had a close to it or above the $1 billion. But what happened is we didn't have a bill for the 2 years before, so we're playing catch up. So the roof that your dad is working underneath or in the facility, year after year, we haven't been fixing them because, they've been patching leaks and moving buckets around. And so because we didn't pass a bill. So now we're trying to catch up on that. And then there's roads. A lot of this goes to the roads that you were saying earlier, all over the state. So it's not exciting things, but I wish I had more time because there's a lot of good things that we've been able to do around this area with Representative Slavics when she was, and Uyghur with the Tubman Center, East Metro. We just fire training center. We've been able to do great things with Century Fab Lab. There's just some great things that we've been able to do for this area and fight for, and I'm pretty proud of it.
Thank you. So if our timer is ready, I would like to just do a 1-minute question just to break up the pace a little bit. And, I like to do this. It's my favorite question, actually, to ask at candidate forums. So we'll start with Leon Lillie. What is your favorite thing about living in District 43B?
So I actually really like the people. I specifically asked for Friday nights off so I can go down to the car show. We had a festival up by Silver Lake. I like to go to the community events, and we've been really blessed with good people that care about it. And I've been honored to serve this area, and I get people that are a lot more conservative than you, and they'll smack me around, but they'll vote for me because they know me for some time. And anyways, I just love the people of this area, and I'm really honored to serve, and I mean that sincerely, and humbled, every time, just to be able to do it. It's just an honor.
Thank you. Rachel Buckles, same question. What is your favorite thing about living in District 43B?
So my dad and my stepmom moved here when I was 9 years old. And Oakdale, you're in North St. Paul, I'm in Oakdale. Oakdale has always been home. It's always been I know we're in the city, but it's the town that I always come home to that has always meant so much to me. It's always had so many just amazing memories. I also grew up in Marshall, Minnesota with my mom and my stepdad. And I had a lot of great memories there too, but I got to Tartan, and I was a kind of a country bumpkin, and I had so many amazing friends right off the bat. And it is the people here. This is home, and this is always going to be home. And I'm so blessed to live here. And I'm so blessed to call this area home.
Thank you very much. So next question, we'll start with Rachel Buckles. And I have several questions kind of on a general theme, basically of early child education and pre-kindergarten programs. And do you think the state funds should be used to expand accessibility to pre-kindergarten programs as well as funding early childhood family education?
So I think that parents are the ultimate advocates for our children. I think that when we want to address the achievement gap, I think that when we have universal pre-K, that's for every kid. So we're talking about some of the kids that are from multimillionaire families. Do they really need the state to be paying for their universal preschool when we've got kids right here at, at Castle, at Cowern, at Richardson that are struggling and their parents probably can't afford for them to go to preschool? I really want to see scholarships. I really want to see parents have the ability to choose where they're going to be sending their children, especially in those very early years. As far as childcare, I talk my childcare provider and I are very close. Her name is Katie, and she's not all that much older than I, and we went to high school together. And she really struggles dealing with DHS and some of the things that they really, really nitpick at. And I don't know if you listened to the hearing, but there is a very, very passionate woman who actually was cited by DHS for her daycare because her grass was too prickly. Just let that sink in. Her grass, it wasn't that there was weeds, it's just that the grass was dry and it was prickly. And so that was when DHS decided to show up and cite her for having prickly grass. And so I think we also need to really kind of loosen up a little bit. We need to make sure that we're upholding the standards that really matter for our children's safety and easing up on some of the things that are kind of weird. But again, early learning scholarships, so parents have the choice to choose where they're going to send their children to, and making sure that we are supporting our daycare providers and not making their job any harder than it already is.
Thank you. So Leon Lillie, same question. Should state funds be used to expand accessibility to pre-kindergarten programs and supporting early childhood family education?
So, our school district, again, some folks probably don't know, but they were leaders by doing all-day kindergarten. And then with Representative then and, both of you, Senator Uyghur as chair of education and Nora Slavik as chair of the early childhood caucus and committee, were able to bring all-day K statewide. And it's just the return on the dollar is just amazing with this stuff. And I wish I knew it, but I think it's $16 to $1. So if you invest $1 in early childhood opportunities, the return on your investment is 16. Now I wish I could do that with all my money as I'm aging here, getting closer to retirement. And we as a state need to really pay attention, and I think I mentioned that earlier with my comments with our community of diversity. We need to make sure that our kids are hitting the ground running, and especially our kids that maybe don't have the opportunities that some of us had as kids. We want to make sure that they're up and running and ready for school, and it propels them way ahead in the long run. And so as far as a state, I believe the investment is worthwhile, and sure, there's going to be some people that have great homes and great parents, maybe have an education background that can help educate the one kid. But overall, as a society, we got to think, as a state legislator, we got to think bigger. We can't think of individual families, unfortunately, but we got to think of the whole community. And our community is complicated, and to really be successful, we need to make sure that all our kids are successful on a path to succeed, and by having education, we can do that.
Thank you. So next question, Leon Lillie. So there are people who feel that new federal regulations are putting our air and clean water at risk. What should the state legislature be doing to increase protection for our state's natural resources?
So I I guess I'm kind of got to toot my own horn. I've been honored to serve on the Legacy Committee, and many of you might not know what that is. It's a committee a few years ago that spends money in these areas that taxpayers approved a few years ago. Is by when we went to the ballot, and 3/8 of 1% goes into a fund, and much of that goes to outdoor hunting and fishing and investments in that. And Speaker Dowd appointed me, and on Thursday and Friday, I'm going to be working on about $118 million bill for the next year and investments in that. And then there's arts and cultural heritage, and then so anyways, in parks and trails. And then there's a big component, 1/3 of the money goes to clean water. So, and it's vitally important. I mean, when you think of Minnesota, what do you think of? I mean, obviously the state fair just got done, so 2 million of you thought about that, of course, and the corn dogs, but it's, and cheese curds or whatever your favorite thing is. But clean water is really what it is. If you remember those ads a couple years ago where the girl was out on the dock skipping a rock, or, I mean, if you can't eat the fish right here at Phelan or, you know, over in Silver Lake or Keller, I mean, it's pretty sad when you think about it. And we're pretty lucky. In greater Minnesota, it's even worse. If you look at the maps, if you look at the aerial map of the Minnesota River, the water is just, I mean, it's just full of runoff and different things. So Governor Dayton has really led, and I've supported him along the way and working with farmers and others to work on some of the buffers and cleaning up some of that water around the state. And there's a lot of, there's all sorts of things that are attacking them. So I don't know as much about air, but quite honestly, I know there's efforts that are in that area, but I could speak for a long time on water. So.
Thank you. Rachel Buckles, same question. What should the state legislature do to protect Minnesota's natural resources?
So I met with some ag groups on Sunday at the fair. I met with milk producers, I met with pork producers, and you know, so many of those groups, I think here in the metro, we always tend to think that farmers aren't, you know, taking care of our water as well as they should be, but truly they are. There's been so many advances in water treatment that's going on in our agriculture that I don't think gets talked about enough. And so I really want to make sure that we support that. I know that I think there was about well over 90% compliance for buffers with a lot of our farmers, and it's really just a few that are just kind of being a stick in the mud about buffers. I think too that some of the holdup is some of the things that came out with Bowser Board of Soil and Water, where there was some pretty excessive fines that they would be hefting on farmers that were non-compliant. I think one of them was even if you are just a few feet out of compliance, rather than fining you for those few feet that were not in compliance, they would fine you for the entire parcel. And in some instances, that parcel of land, especially if you've got a creek running through on both sides, or the creek is running directly in the middle of your parcel, you're going to be paying for that entire parcel double because you're paying on both sides of that creek. And so, you know, there's things like that that we really need to address, and I'm glad that we did at the legislature. We addressed Bowser trying to, you know, unilaterally make that decision. So I think if we try to listen to all these other groups that are trying to do the right thing and realize that not all of us have the same enemies that we think we do, and we work together to create water quality and water plans that are unique to every region of our state, I think that's where we're going to see a lot more consensus, and I think that's where we're going to see a lot of the problems kind of decrease with our water quality issues.
Thank you. Next question, we'll start with Rachel Buckles. There are a couple of questions here on this same topic, and so I would just pick one as just kind of an example of this issue. Do you support background checks before a person can buy a gun or rifle in the state of Minnesota? Why or why not?
So this is funny. My husband and I actually had this debate at the state fair booth. That was a question that was on the House information ballot. And I think that there is a lot of common sense that we should be applying to our guns. But I think that some of the legislation that came out this last biennium was really restrictive. So for example, my husband, he owns shotguns. I personally do not, but my husband and I both like to go deer hunting. So when we go hunting, I will use one of his shotguns. Well, the question is, how far do these background checks need to go? Does my husband need to run a background check on me, his wife, to borrow his shotgun when we go hunting together? I'm in the military, or I was in the military. I've taken firearm safety. We're very responsible gun owners. So does he need to provide or do a background check on me to borrow his shotgun to go hunting? So I think we kind of need to draw a line on what is common sense, which if you go to Cabela's and you buy a gun, you know, I think that overwhelmingly the state has kind of said that that's what they'd like to see. But I think when we start talking about private transactions, that can get pretty broad and pretty vague. And so I think when you're talking about transactions between family members, I think that's not exactly necessary. If you're talking about you're just selling to somebody on eBay, well, maybe that's a little something that you might want to double check on before you might become liable. So I think that there is some consensus that we can build on, but I also think that we need to be very careful that we're not infringing on Second Amendment rights either.
Thank you. Leon, Lillie, same question. Do you support background checks before a person can buy a gun or rifle in the state of Minnesota, and why or why not?
There's a couple things that happen at the legislature that the public sometimes doesn't see, is that sometimes bills don't get hearings. And so it's a bit frustrating to me, because I think you send us, you know, whether you win or I win, they'll send us to vote. And so one of the things that happens is bills won't get hearings, and that happened. There was kind of a situation where they kind of forced the chair to have a hearing, and then they had a hearing, and then but there is some really extreme, I think, in many senses, like ban all guns bills, and you know, obviously those aren't going to go anywhere in all reality. And then there's common sense stuff that makes sense that I think everybody would get behind. Certainly, background checks make sense to me. I just don't really see a big problem with that. And then, I don't know about you, but I would imagine it's the same for everybody. We all know somebody in our life that probably shouldn't have a gun. You know, somebody that might have some mental health issues, or someone that has at a bad point in their life, or but really the people that, that have clearly shown that they're hostile, I think, to me, I would be comfortable with somehow, having a check in on that. So it gets tricky as far as how far you go, but I'm pretty comfortable with having some bookend. And I think it's pretty clear, if you really look at your own lives, you all know somebody that probably shouldn't have a gun, whether they're, if they're going through a really bad divorce and they've just, both couples have been fighting, or, anyways, I can think of 100 scenarios. So anyways, that's my answer.
Thank you. So Leon, Lillie, but still with you. So we all have read a lot about immigration policies that have been in the news recently. The question is, should Minnesota allow sanctuary cities and sanctuary churches? And if yes or no, why or why not?
Yes, I think we should. I think we've recently found that there's many people, I don't know if you get an opportunity to read. I grew up in a newspaper family, so I read papers all over. There's some great articles of what's going on in Iowa right now. And a lot of people are that are visiting Iowa, and I'm sure it's the same in Worthington, because I've talked to her boss from Worthington. I've talked to one of her bosses, right? Is that Hamilton's not your boss?
No, legislators are not bosses.
Okay, your teammate. Okay, not boss. I don't know what you want. Sorry, I didn't mean to insult you. Okay, thought we were partners. So that you work for. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, anyways, they have many folks that are in town that are working at different places, and obviously someone's hiring them. Someone's putting them to work. I mean, they're not just showing up because of the weather. I mean, think about it. It's going to be snowing here soon, and if you're from South America, you're probably not going to choose Minnesota unless there's a job or some opportunity. So I I think that we need to allow different jurisdictions, to make their choices on this, and they can decide. I think that we should have ways that people can get into the country through a structured way, and I hope we can figure that all out in a peaceful, respectful manner. And so that's it.
Thank you. To Rachel Buckles, same question. Should Minnesota allow sanctuary cities and sanctuary churches? Why or why not?
So that would be a yes and a no, or I guess a no and a yes. Cities fall under the jurisdiction of the law, and so do churches to an extent, but just as I am very hesitant to have the church try to bring more and more law into the government, I would also be very hesitant to try to put more oversight on churches. So if that's what churches want to do, then that's what churches want to do. As far as cities go, I think that we start to kind of run into some problems that might, again, have unintended consequences. Of course, there are, I think for every one bad person who comes to America for nefarious reasons, drug cartels and things like that, there's probably dozens more families that are truly trying to escape a lot of the poverty that's going on and just so many of the bad things that are going on in South America, especially in Venezuela. So I know that there's a lot of good people that are truly trying to seek a better life. My concern is, though, Minnesota is kind of on the lists of hubs for human trafficking, specifically St. Cloud. During the Super Bowl, there was a lot of concern about exponential increasing in human trafficking. We also have I-35 and 94 that are also corridors for drug trafficking. And so I think of course, we want to be fair to families that are just trying to do the right thing and for whatever reason are having a tough time with that, because I know our immigration system is kind of a mess. But I am also concerned about people that might be taking advantage of that and could be harming our kids, our family members in the process.
Thank you. So we're back to you, Rachel Buckles, on the next question. There are surveys about what voters in general care about, and apparently Minnesota voters care about campaign finance laws. So do you support changes to campaign finance in the state of Minnesota?
I would propose there to be as much transparency as possible, not just to voters, but I think also to donors. This is my first time ever running a campaign, and so I think about all the people that have donated to my campaign, and I see a few of them in the room here. And I'm always very conscious of making sure that I spend that money as best as I can, because it's not mine. It's money that people are putting behind me to support me. And so I think that having more transparency in our campaign finance laws would be a good thing for not just people that are, nitpicking at your campaign, because, there's probably people that look at your campaign and go, oh, Lillie, what did you spend your money on? But we also need to look at our donors, too, to make sure that their money is going to what their candidate said it would go to. I also know the headache that our treasurers for our campaigns go through as well. And so I'm sure if we could try to streamline some of that process, that would work out quite nicely for some of the behind-the-scenes folks on our campaigns. I can't really think of a whole lot else except for just much more transparency.
Thank you. Leon Lillie, same question. Do you support changes to campaign finance laws in the state of Minnesota?
Thank you for the question. I think campaigns are pretty, for the most part, like at our level, are pretty straightforward. It's somewhat what happens is the outside groups get a little, and you're not really sure where that's coming from. So with the Supreme Court decision, like everybody else, I was probably paying attention to Dorothy's shoes and the Supreme Court today, and the big state fair numbers when they came in the record setting. So, but the Supreme Court made that decision a few years ago that we can, that money can be spent, and we don't necessarily know who it is. So I don't know what we can do as a state necessarily. Myself, maybe there's something, but I think what I find is, many of the races, and ours has been blessed so far that we haven't had any of that on either side that I'm aware of, unless you've gotten some mail that I haven't seen yet. But, it's usually pretty straightforward. So it'll be a debate of her ideas versus mine at this point. But some races on both sides of the aisle are honestly guilty of it. We'll do it and say stuff about each side, and it comes from a mystery party that you never know who it is. So it is frustrating. I didn't see the timer, so I'm probably done. But I think elections that I've seen are pretty clean and straightforward. But I believe if you've heard what's going to happen with the statewide races, and I mean the media buys have been huge, and we're just going to get inundated here real quick for the next 60 days. It's just going to be crazy land on our TVs with all the governor races and the Senate races and all the statewide and on. So it's going to be, and we're not, look at the very end, you're not going to know who they're coming from, some of it. So.
Thank you. So Leon, Lillie, next question is for you. 32% of the children in Minnesota live in low income or poverty family situations. And what role should the state play in helping these children and their families?
Many of our kids are really, truly struggling, and our neighbors right here in, I want to say River City, right here in our neighborhood, but it's, my folks are over here, and we debated it today about how many kids are couch surfing. So, and I think one said 17% and 16% was the other, I think, or something, and I don't think they agreed to disagree at the end. But nonetheless, the point is that just think about that as how many kids don't know where they're going to spend the night. So that's part of the reason I like being on capital investment. We made some investments in housing for folks. And think about that as a barometer. And then you think about food, that a lot of kids that don't have food security. And how are they going to come in and learn? How are you? And if you don't have health care. So that's why that's why I'm for universal health care. I just really believe that you should have health care. You should have housing. You should have food. And if you don't have those, I don't know how you're going to, it just makes it hard to succeed. Yes, there's going to be some kids that punch their way through, and we'll hear about them, the Michael Jordans, and, I can't think of an academic one, but, that'll rise to the top and be the champion of the world. But a lot of kids, the Joe average, or Jane average person is going to, have a hard time, so.
Thank you. Rachel Buckles, same question. 32% of the children in Minnesota live in poverty or low-income family situations. What role should the state play in helping these children and their families?
Strengthening parents, really. I was that teen mom that was struggling to make ends meet. I was that teen mom that made sure that my child ate, and I missed a meal or 5. I was that mom that was literally counting out my pennies to pay for diapers. So I know firsthand how tough it is, and I can't imagine being a child. I mean, I at least had the opportunity of being 18 and getting a job. I can't imagine what it would be like to be, my son's age and couch surfing and not even old enough to get a legal job. And so I think what we need to do is strengthen our families and our parents. And if our parents are the reason why our children are couch surfing, then we as a community need to come together, because the last thing that child needs is to get lost in a statewide system. What that child needs is to have stability and to have structure and to have a community that's supporting them, because at the end of the day, you can give a child all the food in the world, you can give them the best clothes, you can give them a mansion, but unless that child has the stability and the love of a parent or a close adult to help guide them, it means nothing. I mean, how many spoiled, entitled brats do we see that are very wealthy? You need the love and consistency of an adult, and in a lot of cases, our parents. But if our parents are lacking in that department, then as a community, as family members, as church members, as activists, come together again at the local level and keep that child in the community and not let them get lost in the system, is what I would say. As a state legislator, I think just supporting initiatives like that, and that's where, you know, if I'm elected or if you're reelected, where we don't address this at St. Paul, but we use our connections that we have in the community and bridge them together with other leaders as well to make sure that these children are taken care of and stay as close to home as possible.
Thank you very much. So the next question, we're back to you, Rach Buckles. And there's a whole bunch of questions all relating to our public schools. We know that the state provides a good amount of our public school funding. So what are your thoughts on public school funding, setting budgets, schools meeting the achievement gap? So general kind of your support of our public schools in the state of Minnesota.
In only 2 minutes. So I'm so happy with the work that ISD 622 has done. I look at the progress that my children have made, and it is just phenomenal. You know, my oldest son is in accelerated programs, and he is taking math that I struggle with as an adult. My middle son, you know, his teachers are working with him constantly to make sure that he's safe and comfortable and just enjoying class. And I mean, my kid went to school today feeling like he was walking into prison, and he came home and he was pretty bouncy and talking about how great of a day he had today. So I think that is a direct reflection on the amazing work that teachers over at Castle do. As far as what we do with our state budget, almost half of our state budget goes to education. And as a parent, I'm perfectly okay with that. I think what we need to do is make sure that our dollars are going into supporting our teachers so that they can teach. It's not going into, you know, to waste. It's not going to things that you're not really going to get a good return on. I want to see our tax dollars go back into our classrooms so that our teachers don't have to spend their own paychecks on school supplies. I don't want to see teachers that are living paycheck to paycheck, sometimes getting second jobs, third jobs, like that's what's going on down in Oklahoma. I don't want to see that happen here in Minnesota. But we also need to make sure that all that money that we're spending, because as a state, we've agreed that, you know, a bulk of our budget is going to go to education. We need to make sure that we're spending those dollars as best as we can and that they're going as close to the children as possible.
Thank you. And Lillie, same question. Your views on support of public education in the state of Minnesota.
I'm actually really proud to be endorsed by the Teachers of Minnesota, Education Minnesota. It's actually something I'm very proud of, and I'll say it publicly. And I support. I've said it multiple times in my discussion items here this evening how important I feel the work is that our educators are doing with our kids, and what that means to Minnesota being as great as we are, and make sure that we're all of that into the future. If anything, I just believe it more every day as I serve, and then when you get in the community, you really see it. And the challenge that's before us. I think 28% statewide of kids are on free or reduced, or is it 20? I think it's 28% of our kids. So 1/3 of our kids are on free or reduced meals every day. I mean, just kind of gives an idea of what their home life might be like, and it, you know, and what the challenges might be there. Just that alone, much less mental health issues that kids are challenged with nowadays, or just on and on and on. So I very much support. I check in with our local school board here. I've been really blessed to have people before me, Senator Uyghur and Nora Slavic, that have lifted me up and taught me that since day one. And if you win, I'm going to be telling you how important the schools are in this area and how important they are to our area, and a matter of pride that I think. And it just beyond that, in the state, when you tour around the state like I have, and you get an opportunity to go into these other schools, and you go into Hibbing and you see the amazing school that they have up there, or just all over the state of Minnesota, and it's just, and the opportunities that education can give to a person to lift them up. I believe that more now than ever.
Thank you very much. So we're going to do our last question before we get to closing statements. And we're going to start with Leon Lillie, and we're going to give them a minute. And so,
I'm watching her.
okay. So tell us about a book you're reading.
So, I'm reading. Ironically, I had a book stolen yesterday. I'm reading a Grisham book, and it was at the airport, and I had it sitting on the ground, and someone took it. So, I don't. It's what I was just reading, and I love Grisham stories, and the Dan Brown books I enjoy. I love to read. I as a legislator and with our campaign life, you really don't get much of a chance to read, but I really enjoy reading. Don't tell my father that, but I didn't do as well in school. I should have read then, but I love reading now.
Thank you. So Rachel Buckles, tell us about a book you're reading.
So, yeah, it's been crazy. I still work full time, still take care of the kiddos, and doing this. So what I like to, when things get really chaotic and hectic and I feel, just really anxious and overwhelmed, the series that I always go back to is Harry Potter. And it was great because my daughter, I don't know if she's still in here, but today she sported a Hufflepuff t-shirt. So she's a very, very avid, first day of school, Hufflepuff. My other son is wearing a Harry Potter shirt too. So, I always just kind of go back to, as the series goes on, it progressively gets more complex. And every single time I reread the series for probably the 29th billionth time, there's always just a different theme and a different facet to it that I find. And you could read the book over and over and over, all of the books over again, and it's always just a little bit different. So I know that sounds a little juvenile, that it's Harry Potter, but that's always my go-to.
Thank you very much. So in closing, I apologize if your question was not asked, and we got to quite a lot of issues, I think, but there's always more in a limited forum such as this, and we can tell they're kind of sagging. We probably should be handing out cookies. So if you have questions that weren't answered, we encourage you to speak to the candidates at the close of the forum or, of course, in the days up to the election. So we're going to do our closing statements in the reverse order from the opening statements. And so remember, you have 2 minutes for your closing remarks. And so in reverse order, that means Leon Lillie, you're first.
First off, I want to say again, thank you for the league for doing this, and I really think it's a neat opportunity, and that we can do this in this country in these times to have a discussion, a debate of ideas, and thank you for that forum and keeping it peaceful and respectful, and hats off to Rachel for that as well. Again, thank you. It's been an honor to serve this area. I really am humbled by this, and it's a privilege to serve this area, North St. Paul, Maplewood, and Oakdale. And I didn't mention stuff in Oakdale, but I love your Summerfest and your and Senator Uyghur and I got the trail, a new bridge that goes through your park right there. Anyways, we can go on, but it's it's just a neat community that and I happen to talk to former Cardinal here. It's not my district, but I'm going to go to his booyah at his church. They got one of the best booyahs. I recommend that you go to it. But it's just, I just really enjoy this this area. I'm proud to I take the part of representative pretty serious. I try to represent. I know it's impossible to represent every voter. Some people are totally going to disagree, but I really do try to listen and hear you out. I'm not the best campaigner, so Rachel's got a chance, but but I try to take the job very seriously, and I do I think a good job. I work very well across both sides of the aisle, and again, I try not to punch the other side in the nose, and I have good relationships with leaders that I think can help us succeed. Senator Uyghur and I have some agenda items that we're working already on for next session, again, thank you for coming out on a horribly rainy day and post cheese curds and all that stuff. I've saw some of you at the fair, but I just it's an honor to serve the state of Minnesota in this area.
Thank you very much. And so we are now ready for Rachel Buckles' closing statement. Again, you have 2 minutes.
So it wasn't a rebuttal that I was going to make. I was just going to say some of the legislators, when I said that I was running against you, they're like, "Aw, but I like him." Well, I do too, but you gotta kind of disagree on some things. So I do really appreciate the opportunity that I have to campaign and to meet, so many different people in the city. I went to Tartan, so it's kind of ingrained into me to have that, rivalry with North St. Paul. My children play hockey with Tartan, but it's been a really wonderful experience to just go all across the district and meet so many new people. People like Dallas and people like Andrew that I never would have met if it wasn't for campaigning. And so it's been a real blessing, and it's also been really nice to kind of campaign against you because, again, I'm not interested in mudslinging. I'm not interested in beating up on all the things that I think have gone wrong. We could focus on that, or we could focus on moving forward. And that's what my intention is if I'm elected, is to just leave the past in the past and just move forward and just work on what are our common goals? How can we achieve our common goals? What do we have differences, and how can we find a common ground to bridge the gap with those differences? And that being said, I also want to thank everyone in the audience for listening to me babble along. This is my very first time speaking in public, so I'm really glad that nobody booed me out of here. There's no tomatoes thrown quite yet, so I really want to thank everybody's patience, and again, thank League of Women Voters for hosting this forum and for giving us this opportunity to share our ideas.
Thank you both. So thank you, and I would like to remind the audience that the views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates and not those of the League of Women Voters, and sponsorship of the forum is not endorsement by the League for any candidate. I'd like to thank the candidates and the live, and TV audience. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, I would like to acknowledge and thank the candidates who are serving their community by their willingness to participate in the democratic process by running for office. I would also like to thank the audience here at the candidate forum at home for taking their time out of, I know, everybody's very busy schedule to watch the candidates discuss issues that are important to you and your community. Again, this forum was aired in its entirety and will be replayed on Comcast Channel 16, as well as on Facebook and on the web portal. So please check your cable channel for those airing times. So remember, every vote does count. This year, Election Day is Tuesday, November 6th. The polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., so you should be able to get there. So please remember to take a friend and a neighbor and vote on Tuesday, November 6th. Thank you, and good night.
Thank you.